All right, good morning. Welcome back. Today we'll be talking about how to create linked lists. And if you remember from the previous classes, you must have learned about arrays, single-dimensional arrays, multi-dimensional arrays. We also probably you have learned in the previous classes about pointers, especially if you're coming from certain language backgrounds, such as C++. In Java classes and some of the other modern language classes, they don't talk about pointers explicitly. There are no explicit pointers, there are implicit pointers. But in C++, what we have is we have explicit pointers. So we'll be discussing arrays first. After we have done discussing arrays, we'll talk about pointers briefly. Then we'll jump directly to linked list. Now, if you remember, in the past, almost all the modern languages, they have a concept called arrays. Can somebody tell me why do we need to use arrays? What's the main benefit of using arrays? Yes?
Continuous memory is faster.
So you can have collection of data. You can access the data faster, sure. Any other benefit? So if you know the size of your data, then you can actually create that much memory to store the data. So for example, in array, this is my integer array, and you can create any kind of array. You can create doubles, characters, booleans, strings, different types of arrays can be created. So if I know if I need to store 5 elements, 5 pieces of data, so I can create these 5 elements like this one. So here's the name of my array. Here's the name of my array, which is of this type, integer type in this case, which means this array has the ability to store only integers, whole numbers, right? So same thing in Java and C# as well. So you have the ability to store either whole numbers or fractional values with decimal places. So in this case, if you remember, in computer science, in most of the cases, almost all of the cases, the starting element address or the index is 0th index. That's the starting location of the first array element. So if you have a size of 5, the first will be 0th, the last one will be 4th. So this is just a repetition or the review of array creation of arrays. So there are some limitations about arrays. What are some of the limitations? Some of the limitations?
Fixed size.
So like it's stated, its size is fixed. So that's a limitation. Now we can argue, we can create dynamic arrays. We call them vectors. Yes, absolutely. But there are some issues associated with dynamic arrays as well, especially when it comes to insertion, deletion, data manipulation. So in case of arrays, if the array looks like this, and let's assume this is the data stored in that array, 15, 40, 0, 18, and 100, what if I want to store the 6th element? I want to store additional data. So that's a kind of handicap I have in case of arrays. I don't have the ability to extend the size of my array. That's one of the limitations in arrays. So array size is fixed. Insertion, deletion, and data manipulation is pretty slow. Although it's possible, but it's a slower process, especially when it comes to large amount of data. We're talking about millions or hundreds of millions of pieces of data, so it slows down the process. So instead of using arrays, we have another concept called pointers. How many of you have learned pointers in the past? Pointers. Some of you. How many of you have never heard pointer? How come you have never heard about pointer? Because you probably took Java class or maybe another programming class where explicit pointers do not exist. Can somebody tell me from this area, from the front, not from the back, from the front, what is a pointer? What is a pointer? How would you describe a pointer to a layperson? Or you're in a party and he or she says, you know what, I like you, I want to marry you. Tell me what the pointer is. That's the key core to my heart. So what is a pointer in that case? Do you think people will ask you that question in the interview? Yes. Say yes. Do you think people will ask you in a party during cocktail? Well, depends. If he or she is from the same background, they say, okay, if you cannot even tell me the pointer, you're fake. You know, you hear fake news these days. So, all right. So what is a pointer, guys? What is a pointer? Help me out. Pointer is a variable which does what? Stores addresses. So normally, when you declare your variable of any type, you store data. You store data. When you store data, let's say, here's my simple variable, assuming it's a simple variable. This is what a simple variable looks like. So you create a variable location. You say int value equals to 15. You store 15 here, and there is an address associated with that memory location. Let's say that address is 1000. So this value variable is pointing towards 1000. But when I say I would like to access that value, I would like to display that value, I would like to manipulate that value, I would like to delete that value, I always use the name of the variable. Because it's easier that way. Because we assign these names or labels to different objects. It's easier. We have a person, we say your name is Joe. We have another person, we say your name is Mary. So we have these labels assigned to these objects. So it's much easier to access the data that way. However, there's a faster way to access the data. And that concept is called pointers. So the pointer is a variable. So pointer is a variable I have written somewhere here. Right there. Pointer is a variable which references a location in the memory. So instead of storing a real value, a value like this or value like this, I can actually store address, or I can point towards that particular location. So C++ gives you that flexibility. There are multiple advantages of doing that. One advantage, it's faster. The second advantage is you can access the free store or the heap of the RAM, which is the biggest part of the memory. So you can actually manipulate larger amount of data. So you have a lot of flexibility. You can access a lot of data, manipulate the data much quicker. So when we are creating linked list in chapter 16, so in CS22, that's the first chapter we'll be starting with. But if you want to spend a little bit more time understanding what the pointers are, refer to chapter 12, at least the beginning part of chapter 12. Chapter 12 talks about what are the pointers, how do you declare a pointer. Here's I'm declaring a pointer with asterisk P. So P is a pointer. I can tell it's a pointer because in C++ this indicates it's a pointer variable. It's a pointer variable which can only point towards the integer data, integral data. So that particular variable type can point only towards integer data. Here's another pointer, character asterisk ch. This is the name of my pointer variable. And I know it's a pointer because of this particular special symbol or asterisk. And it can point towards character data, just one character at a time. Or I can actually create much more complex data set. In this case, I can create a data structure with the keyword struct. Did you use data structures in Java, in C#? Data structures? What is a data structure? How can you define a data structure? So another limitation I had in array, we know we talked about fixed number of pieces of data, fixed size. Show me another limitation in array. One of the very big limitation in case of array. Come on guys, help me. Let's make it dynamic, active. It's okay to make a mistake. Yeah.
Deletion.
Right, we talked about those operations. Those are difficult issues, but there's another major hindrance, major issue associated with arrays. Yeah, Chris. You're absolutely right. One of the limitations I have, all the elements or all the values or data stored here are of the same type. That's a big kind of a handicap for me. I can only store integers in this array. Num array can only store integers, whole numbers. What if I want to store first names and last names and addresses and zip codes and other numeric values. I cannot really do that with arrays. So we have another concept called data structure. In data structure, you use the keyword struct, open curly braces, close curly braces, ends with a semicolon. I forgot the semicolon here. And this is the name of your data structure. You can call it employee, you can call it student, you can call it whatever you want to call it, based on what exactly you're trying to create. So for example, if you're creating an employee, you might have ID, first name, last name, phone number, email address, all those things. So it will be a very large data structure. But because we have limited space here, so I'm creating this data structure called node type. You say that confuses me. What is node type? Well, it's just a name. Just a name. You want to call it something else? You can call it something else. So node type is just a name given by the developer, like yourself. So then I can have different types of data in node type. For example, if I want to create a data structure of employee type, like I stated earlier, I can say struct employee. Let's keep it simple. And I can have integer ID, string fname, and I can have double salary, and on and on and on, and I can add all these things. And if you say, what is an employee? Well, I created that employee because in that organizational setting, we need an object which is called employee. So we can instantiate some of these components within that employee. So these are some of the components within that employee data structure. Now you say, I'm still not understanding. How about classes? What is a class? Help me understand class. Remember, we discussed classes in Java and C# and C++ probably. How do you define a class? Yeah, Chris?
Blueprint for your object.
So blueprint of your object, that really is not really clear to a layperson. So let's make it simpler. Chris, make it simpler. So class is an abstract data type. Class is, like you said, something I want to create. It doesn't exist within the language of, within the C++ language. I have simple integers and doubles and strings and characters and booleans and probably a few other types. But I want to create something complex. It doesn't exist. I want to create an employee. It doesn't exist. So I can say, well, class is more than a data structure. In fact, if I remove the word struct from here, put the word class, it becomes a class. But class has few additional things, additional components. Class can have data as well as actions, functions as well as variables. In data structure, you can see mostly we have data, data variables. But classes can also include constructors and destructors and different types of private and public and friend type of methods. So class is more than a data structure. So data structure is like a first step towards object-oriented. You guys are with me? So data structure is a first step towards object-oriented programming. Before data structure, if you do not want to touch data structure, you deal with single-dimensional array or two-dimensional array or multi-dimensional array. Okay? So I'm going to pause here and then we'll continue our discussion.